You will think of her as distant, perhaps cold. But what if I told you she is not cold at all, only free? Most women spend half their lives trying to be understood, to be chosen, to be worthy in the eyes of a gaze that was never capable of truly seeing them. They twist themselves into shapes that please, they speak softly to be accepted, they hold their breath just enough not to threaten anyone with the power of their truth. Yet something strange begins to happen when the soul grows tired of the performance. There comes a quiet rebellion, not loud, not dramatic, just a slow turning inward, like the moon drawing back her light from a sky that no longer deserves it. This is where individuation begins. Jung once called it the process of becoming who one truly is, when the persona begins to crumble and the shadow whispers its truth. For the feminine psyche, this is the moment she stops seeking her reflection in the eyes of others. The need to prove dissolves, because validation becomes too small a currency for a soul that has tasted self-recognition. In this state, she no longer measures her worth through how much she is desired, admired, or chosen. Desire becomes a mirror she no longer needs. She begins to see that the man who cannot meet her depth is not rejecting her, he is simply drowning in his own unhealed wounds, terrified of what her stillness reveals in him. The truth is, when a woman no longer needs to prove herself, she becomes the mirror of every man's unconscious. Her silence exposes the boy still seeking a mother's approval, her detachment confronts his fear of being unseen. You can sense it, the magnetic pull of a woman who no longer negotiates her worth. She walks through the world like a calm storm. She is not chasing, not persuading, not begging to be remembered. And that, paradoxically, is when she becomes unforgettable. The ego of man, the fragile structure that feeds on admiration and control, begins to tremble before this kind of woman. Because she does not play the game. She no longer needs to win arguments, to correct his misunderstandings, to explain the reasons behind her silence. She simply is. Her existence is the argument. Her serenity, the victory. In the old mythology of psyche and soul, she was called anima, the feminine essence that draws man toward his own wholeness. But only a few are brave enough to face her without projecting their fears onto her. For many, she becomes an obsession, a ghost haunting the chambers of memory. For others, she becomes the teacher they could never thank, because her lesson arrived wrapped in loss. A woman who no longer needs to prove herself lives in a paradoxical peace. She feels deeply, yet does not cling. She loves, yet does not seek to possess. Her heart is open, but her energy is guarded, not out of fear, but out of reverence for her own spirit. She no longer feeds the emptiness of those who refuse to face their own shadows. It is not that she has stopped loving, it is that she loves differently now. She no longer offers her tenderness as proof of goodness. She no longer bleeds to be believed. She has learned that some souls cannot meet her at the level of truth, they only know how to consume. And so she withdraws, not in bitterness, but in quiet mastery. This stage of her becoming is often misunderstood. The world will call her selfish, detached, difficult. Yet beneath the surface, something sacred is unfolding. Her psyche is reorganizing itself around her own center. What was once fragmented, the pleasing child, the pleasing lover, the pleasing friend, has begun to integrate into something whole. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And for the feminine psyche, that privilege arrives only after countless cycles of proving, pleasing, and pretending. The exhaustion becomes the initiation. The heartbreak becomes the teacher. One day, she wakes up and realizes she no longer needs to explain her worth to anyone, especially to those who made her question it. She begins to understand that silence can speak more truth than 1,000 justifications. And in that silence, she feels the weight of centuries lift from her shoulders. The ancestral burden of being enough begins to dissolve. In the stillness of her own company, she finds something men and society could never give her, herself. And that is the moment she becomes untouchable. There is a quiet kind of power that emerges when a woman no longer defends her existence. It is not rebellion. It is remembrance. What begins to awaken within her is not arrogance, but alignment. The energy that once flowed outward, trying to impress, to soothe, to fix, to be chosen, turns inward, spiraling back to its source. And in this return, something ancient begins to breathe again. This is the feminine soul remembering its own divinity, its sacred indifference to the approval of the world. In Jungian terms, this is the confrontation with the shadow self, the part of her that she had once buried beneath perfection and politeness. The part that felt rage, envy, desire, grief. For years, she feared those feelings, mistaking them for weakness or unworthiness. Yet as she begins to face them without shame, they transform. The rage becomes clarity. The envy becomes direction. The grief becomes compassion. The woman who integrates her shadow no longer divides herself into the good girl and the wild one. She no longer splits her heart between the one who nurtures and the one who destroys. She becomes both. And because she becomes both, she becomes whole. To the outside world, this transformation is subtle. She may look the same eyes, same smile, but the frequency has changed. The old patterns no longer work on her. The manipulations, the silent tests, the push and pull of emotional games, all dissolve before her calm gaze. A man who once could pull her into chaos now finds himself disarmed by her stillness. Her peace becomes her boundary. This new state of being confuses those who once fed on her insecurities. They may call her detached, unfeeling, even cold. But the truth is that she now feels everything, just differently. She no longer confuses empathy with self-abandonment. She can witness another's pain without making it her responsibility. This is what Jung would call differentiation, the ability to remain connected without losing the self. She understands now that love is not sacrifice, it is presence. To love without losing herself is her new art form. It is not that she loves less, but that she loves with awareness. Her heart has become discerning. She sees through projection, through flattery, through the illusion of specialness that once made her chase. She has seen the underbelly of human attachment, the hunger to possess, and she chooses something higher. You can feel it when such a woman enters a room. There is no performance in her presence. She does not seek to attract, and yet she magnetizes. Her power is not in what she reveals but in what she withholds. The stillness around her is alive. It speaks of a woman who has met her own depths and made peace with them. Men often find this energy both intoxicating and terrifying, because she mirrors to them their own fragmentation. Her calm presence exposes the parts of them still enslaved by the need to conquer, to be admired, to be validated. In her silence, they meet their own noise. In her wholeness, they feel their own void. Some will try to pull her back into the dance of proving, to provoke her into defending, explaining, reacting. But she has already seen that game. The bait no longer works. She knows that arguing with misunderstanding is a form of self-betrayal. So she remains silent, not in defeat, but in sovereignty. This is where her power becomes almost spiritual. Because silence, when it comes from awareness, becomes a weapon of transformation. It is not passive. It is alchemical. Her silence does not punish, it reveals. It forces truth to surface. It lets illusion collapse under its own weight. And yet, this silence is not void of emotion. It carries a subtle tenderness, a quiet compassion for those still lost in their own projections. For she remembers the time when she too sought herself in the eyes of others. But compassion no longer means returning to that prison. It means understanding without re-entering. She now walks the world with a new kind of grace, a grace that is not about being soft, but about being sure. She does not explain her boundaries. She simply lives them. She no longer decorates her no with apologies. She does not need to be understood to be authentic. In this space, love becomes something entirely different. It ceases to be a transaction of validation and becomes a communion of presence. Those who can meet her here feel peace. Those who cannot, disappear. Because the woman who no longer needs to prove herself does not chase, persuade, or convince. She embodies. She vibrates. She is. There comes a moment in every woman's inner evolution when the old identities begin to dissolve: mother, lover, nurturer, savior. The archetypes that once defined her start to feel too small, too fragile to contain the magnitude of her being. It is not that she abandons them, she simply transcends them. What remains is essence, pure, untamed, unbothered essence. This is the rebirth that Jung spoke of when he described individuation, the moment when one ceases to live through inherited scripts and begins to write her own. It is a death of illusion, a quiet shedding of masks. And it often begins in loneliness. Not the kind that longs for company, but the sacred kind, the loneliness that precedes revelation. In that space, stripped of performance, she meets the raw truth of who she has always been. She faces the emptiness beneath the noise, the hunger that no man, no love, no approval has ever filled. And she sees, perhaps for the first time, that the hunger was never for others, it was for herself. It is here, in the still chamber of solitude, that she encounters the eternal feminine within her, the Sophia, the anima mundi, the quiet intelligence that has always whispered beneath the surface. It speaks not in words, but in knowing. It tells her, you are already enough. You always were. You were never meant to prove, only to be. From this point forward, her life begins to reorder itself. The relationships that were built on imbalance start to fall away. The conversations that once thrilled her now feel hollow. She no longer tolerates half-truths or half-presence. Her standards shift, not out of pride, but out of clarity. What once felt like rejection now feels like redirection. What once broke her now baptizes her in strength. She starts to move through the world differently. Her energy no longer leaks into validation seeking. She becomes intentional. Where she gives fully. Where she withdraws, she does so without guilt. There is an elegance to her detachment, not coldness but discernment. The kind of detachment that comes from having seen the cycles of illusion too many times to participate again. And in that detachment, she becomes magnetic beyond understanding. Because the universe always echoes back the frequency of self-respect. Her stillness begins to attract those who recognize it, not as mystery to be conquered, but as depth to be met. Men who encounter her now face a test of consciousness. Some will feel the urge to dominate, to shatter her calm. They will speak louder, demand attention, mistake her peace for passivity. Yet the more they try to pull her into reaction, the quieter she becomes. That silence, steady, unwavering, becomes their mirror. In her presence, they are forced to confront their own chaos, their own unintegrated masculine. Those who are not ready will flee, inventing stories of her coldness. They will call her too complex, too distant, too much. But others, those few who have met their own shadow, will recognize her for what she is, not a storm to survive, but a sanctuary to enter. She no longer explains this difference. She no longer pleads to be understood. She knows that true connection is not built on persuasion, but resonance. The ones meant to meet her will already speak her language, the quiet, ancient language of souls who have done the work. In her solitude, she no longer feels the ache of loneliness. She feels spaciousness instead. The kind of space that allows life to move through her without resistance. She becomes less interested in seeking happiness and more devoted to cultivating peace. She starts to understand that peace is not the absence of pain, but the presence of acceptance. Her feminine energy, once scattered in the pursuit of validation, becomes concentrated. It radiates through her voice, her eyes, her stillness. Even in silence, she speaks volumes. She becomes a woman of depth, not because she tries to be, but because she finally stopped trying to be anything else. This transformation does not make her untouchable, it makes her true. And truth has its own gravity. It does not chase, it pulls. In this new frequency, love transforms from dependency to devotion, from desire to reverence. She no longer seeks to be adored, she seeks to be met. She no longer plays roles, she embodies archetypes. The maiden becomes the sage, the lover becomes the healer, the nurturer becomes the sovereign. And in this sovereignty, her very presence begins to teach without words. She becomes living evidence of what Jung meant when he said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. She has accepted herself completely, and that acceptance is her quiet revolution. As she walks deeper into her sovereignty, a new clarity begins to bloom within her, a clarity that pierces through illusion like dawn through fog. She starts to see the intricate web of projection that once defined her relationships, the way she became a mirror for others' unhealed parts. She remembers how easily she absorbed their wounds, mistaking them for her own. Now, she stands outside of that pattern, watching it with sacred detachment. She understands what Jung meant when he said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. She sees that every person who ever demanded her proof, her explanation, her loyalty, was simply searching for their own reflection. And for years, she played that role flawlessly. She reflected back love, softness, empathy, until there was nothing left for herself. But she has outgrown that mirror. Her consciousness has matured into a quiet awareness. Not everyone can meet her as she is. Some people can only love her through their projection, the fantasy of what they need her to be. To stay in those places would be to shrink again, to live inside someone else's dream. And she has already died once in that dream. Once is enough. The woman who no longer needs to prove herself now lives with a subtle kind of discernment, a sensing, not thinking. She no longer seeks clarity through conversation, she feels it in energy. If the connection is real, it flows. If it isn't, it fades. No resistance, no argument. She trusts the intelligence of energy more than the promises of words. To some, this makes her mysterious, even intimidating. But her mystery is not a mask, it's her truth, unfiltered. It's the quiet confidence of one who has faced her inner chaos and learned to dance with it. Her mystery is her mastery. There is beauty in the way she moves through endings now. Once, she would have begged to understand, to fix, to be chosen again. Now, she bows to the cycle, understanding that every departure is sacred. She knows that closure is not found in words but in acceptance. She no longer grieves what leaves her, she honors it. Because she knows that every loss that stripped her was, in truth, an initiation. And there were many initiations. The heartbreaks that felt like death. The silences that cut like glass. The moments when she doubted her worth so deeply that she mistook pain for passion. Each one was a descent into the underworld of her own psyche. Each one revealed another layer of her truth. Each one broke her open in ways that logic could never heal, only the soul could. Through that descent, she met the archetypes that had been sleeping inside her, the lover, the priestess, the queen. The lover taught her surrender. The priestess taught her intuition. The queen taught her boundaries. Together, they rebuilt her from the ashes of her proving. And now, she no longer performs for love, she channels it. She no longer gives to be seen, she gives because it overflows. Her giving is not a transaction, it is an expression. It flows from fullness, not emptiness. She understands now that her energy is sacred currency. She spends it wisely. She no longer invests in those who cannot meet her halfway. She no longer lowers her frequency to be understood. She lets misunderstanding be the boundary. It is not pride, it is peace. To the untrained eye, this peace might look like distance. But to those who have known chaos, it is the sweetest intimacy. Because she no longer performs closeness, she is closeness. Her very presence feels like home, because she has built it within herself. And when love returns, as it always does, she receives it differently. She does not question why it came, she asks whether it is conscious. She no longer confuses intensity for connection, or passion for purpose. She knows that true love does not burn, it glows. It does not consume, it expands. Men who meet her now are not offered her body first, nor even her heart, but her energy. And that energy tests them. It reveals who can stay grounded in the face of real presence, and who trembles before it. Because real feminine energy, when it is whole, is not soft, it is still. And stillness is the most terrifying mirror of all. In that stillness, she no longer needs to be right. She no longer needs to win. She no longer needs to be seen. The game of ego has ended. The only game left is truth, and truth is enough. For the first time, she feels unshakable. Not because life has stopped testing her, but because she no longer takes the tests personally. Every challenge now feels like an invitation to deepen her calm. Every disappointment, an opportunity to return to herself. She does not chase, she does not cling, she does not compete. She simply allows. And in that allowance, she becomes untamed, unmovable, undeniable. There is a sacred silence that follows awakening, a silence that is not emptiness, but fullness contained. It is the still breath after the storm, the moment when a woman realizes that nothing outside her can disturb what she has built within. This silence is not about withdrawal, it is about power. It is the silence of knowing, the silence of embodiment. She has walked through the fires of proving, through the dark corridors of self-doubt, through the aching hunger to be seen, and she has emerged luminous. The world has not changed, but her perception has. The same words, the same faces, the same temptations appear before her, yet she no longer vibrates at their frequency. This is the essence of individuation. Jung described it as the merging of the conscious and unconscious, the reconciliation of light and shadow. But for the awakened feminine, it feels like remembering. Remembering that she was never meant to fight for her worth, only to express it. Remembering that love is not found through effort, but through energy. Remembering that her silence, her presence, her intuition are not weaknesses, they are ancient languages, spoken fluently by the soul. Now, she no longer reacts, she responds. The difference is everything. Reaction comes from fear, response comes from wisdom. When the world provokes her, she breathes. When someone misunderstands her silence, she smiles. When she feels the familiar pull to prove herself, she pauses. And in that pause, she feels the entire lineage of women behind her, mothers, daughters, ancestors, exhaling in relief. The chain has been broken. Her energy moves differently now. It does not scatter toward what she wants, it attracts what resonates. The magnetic field of her being, once diffused through seeking, has become focused through stillness. She has become the embodiment of what Jung called the self, the unified psyche, the center that needs no validation. There is no longer anxiety in her solitude. There is music in it, a frequency that hums of freedom and presence. She is not waiting to be chosen, she is choosing. Choosing peace over drama, presence over performance, authenticity over approval. In this freedom, she also forgives. Not for their sake, but for her own liberation. She forgives the ones who could not see her, because she now understands they were blinded by their own shadow. She forgives the ones who demanded her proof, because they did not yet know how to see truth. She forgives the girl she once was, the one who tried so desperately to earn love by becoming small. That girl was not wrong, she was just early in her evolution. Now, she moves through the world like a poem written in human form. Every step says, I am enough. Every breath says, I am whole. The energy around her begins to shift, even chaos seems to soften in her presence. People feel it, the unspoken power of someone who no longer seeks to be right, but to be real. She understands now that love, true love, is not something to achieve. It is a state to inhabit. When she stopped chasing it, she became it. Her relationships now mirror her peace, balanced, conscious, rooted in mutual recognition rather than projection. When she speaks from truth, not from need. When she loves freely, without fear of loss. Because she knows that what is meant for her cannot be taken, and what is taken was never truly hers. This is the paradox of power: the less she grasps, the more she holds. The less she seeks, the more she finds. The less she speaks, the more she is heard. Because her energy speaks for her, and it speaks fluently in the language of truth. When a woman no longer needs to prove herself, she becomes the embodiment of serenity in a world addicted to noise. She becomes the mystery that awakens the masculine, the balance that restores chaos, the mirror that reveals the unconscious. And through her, the collective begins to heal, not through teaching, but through being. She does not need to shout her value, nor display it. Her presence is her message. Her calm is her revolution. Her silence is her song. And if you listen closely, beneath all the noise of this modern world, you can almost hear it, the quiet pulse of the awakened feminine, the heartbeat of every woman who has remembered who she is. The woman who understands her worth does not chase, she chooses.